The call that ended my career did not sound dramatic at first. I did not know then that another voice would find me months later, miles from that flood, using the same helpless tone. It came through the county dispatch line during a March storm, when every creek in Tennessee had turned the color of coffee, and every road name on the board flashed red. A man was trapped in his truck near Miller's Crossing. Water pushed against the doors. I had the rescue unit on standby, the map open, and the protocol sheet beside my keyboard. Name, location, vehicle color, water depth, road access, simple things, necessary things. But the man kept saying, "Don't hang up. Please don't let the water take me while you're listening." For 2 seconds too long, I stared at the wrong line of procedure. 2 seconds does not sound like much until someone spends the last of his air inside them. Afterward, people were kind in the way that makes guilt heavier. My supervisor said no one could have known the bridge would collapse. The rescue captain said I followed policy. My mother said I needed sleep. None of it helped. By summer, I had quit dispatch and stopped answering unknown numbers. Most mornings, I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to traffic outside, wondering how a voice could stay in your head after the person was gone. Then Mason called. I almost let it ring out. Mason had been a ranger for decades, and he never called unless something was wrong or someone had died. When I answered, he did not ask how I was doing. That was one thing I liked about him. He said, "Caleb, I've got seasonal work if you want it." I laughed. "Doing what?" "Night coverage," he said. "Hollow Ridge Station, Appalachian side, quiet post, long as you know when not to answer." The cold in his voice made me sit straighter. "I don't know anything about being a ranger," I told him. "You know radios, you know logs, you know procedure." Then he paused. "Up there," he said, "procedure matters more than courage." I wish I had asked why he sounded relieved when I agreed. Because 3 nights later, a voice would beg through that station radio from a trail closed 12 years. And this time, the rule would tell me to let it beg. I met Mason the next morning at a gas station outside Bryson City, where the pavement was still wet from overnight rain, and the mountains sat behind the pumps like something sleeping under a blanket. He looked older than I remembered. Not weak, exactly. Mason had never looked weak a day in his life. But the skin under his eyes had gone loose, and his ranger jacket hung off him like he had lost weight without admitting it. He took my duffel, tossed it into the back of his truck, and nodded toward the passenger seat. The first hour felt ordinary enough. He drove with one hand on the wheel, coffee balanced between his knees, pointing out washed-out shoulders and old logging cuts like a man giving a tour he had given too many times. The higher we climbed, the fewer houses we passed. Mailboxes disappeared first, then fences, then cell service. By the time the road narrowed into gravel, the forest had pressed close enough that branches scraped both sides of the truck. I tried to make it lighter. "So what happened to the last guy? He get bored and run off to Gatlinburg?" Mason did not smile. "He left," he said. "That's all?" "He left during daylight," Mason said. "That's the part I never understood." The answer sat between us. Outside, the morning was beautiful in that Appalachian way that almost feels dishonest. All blue ridges and wet leaves shining like glass. But every few miles, we passed signs turned backward, trail gates chained twice, and orange survey ribbons tied around trees that did not look surveyed for anything. One ribbon had been tied on the inside of a locked gate. I noticed a sign, half swallowed by kudzu. Hollow Ridge Access, closed after dark. Is this one of those stations with local ghost stories? I asked. Ghost stories are for places that want attention. And Hollow Ridge doesn't? Mason kept his eyes on the road. Hollow Ridge doesn't care what you believe. A mile later, he slowed near a washed-out bridge. Up here, don't improvise after dark. If something feels urgent, slow down. If something sounds human, verify it. If something begs, check the rules before you answer. My throat tightened, because that was exactly what the man in the flood had done. He had begged. Then, through the trees ahead, I saw the antenna tower of Hollow Ridge Ranger Station, and below it, hanging from the trees in a crooked line, were dozens of rusted bells. The bells were the first thing I noticed, because they made no sound. There must have been 30 hanging from trees, tied with cord and rusted wire. Some were handbells. Some looked stolen from porches or church doors. They formed a crooked half-circle around the lot, too deliberate to be junk and too ugly to be decoration. Mason parked beside a low cinder-block building with a green metal roof and an antenna bolted to one side. In daylight, Hollow Ridge should have looked harmless. It had a flagpole with no flag, a rain barrel, fuel cans, and a wooden sign carved with the station name. But the closer I got, the less it looked like a workplace, and the more it looked like a place built to keep something out, or keep something in. Every window had storm shutters folded against the siding, though the sky was clear. The front door had 2 locks, one normal, and one heavy deadbolt installed too high, like it had been added in a hurry. Above the porch light, someone had screwed a mirror strip against the frame, not toward the porch, not toward the door, toward the trees. Mason still had not taken his eyes off the bells. He looked like a man counting to make sure they were all there. Inside, the station smelled like dust, pine cleaner, and old coffee. There was a radio desk, trail maps, a cot in back, and clipboards hanging in perfect order. For 1 second, it comforted me. Radios, logs, procedure. Then I noticed the maps. The markings were not random. I recognized the look of a system patched by frightened people. Several trails had been marked in red. Others had been scratched out so hard the paper had torn. Trail 11 was not just closed. Someone had blacked it out completely, as if the line itself was dangerous to see. Near the office door stood a gray metal cabinet with a padlock through the handle. Night incidents. I tried to laugh, but the sound died in my throat. Mason looked at me. "Before you touch that radio," he said, "you need to understand why those bells are there." Outside, one bell moved without wind. I waited for the ring. It never came. Mason's face changed anyway. "Good," he said quietly. "That means it's still far enough away to warn us first." Mason took a laminated sheet from the top drawer and set it on the radio desk like evidence. It was not titled Ghost Instructions or Local Warnings. It looked official, which made it worse. The header read, Hollow Ridge Night Protocol, revised 3 months earlier. There was a station number, a supervisor's signature, and one corner worn soft from too many hands. 6 rules had been typed beneath it, each numbered cleanly each ending without explanation. Mason tapped the first one. If the station radio receives a call from Trail 11 after 9:17 p.m., log it. Do not answer. I looked toward the blacked-out trail on the map. Why 9:17? Because that's when it starts. He moved on before I could ask what he meant. Rule 2 said if fog rose uphill against the wind, I had to lock the lower equipment shed and count the trail bells before midnight. Rule 3 said if a hiker knocked 3 times and gave a full name, I was supposed to ask for a permit number before opening the door. That one almost made sense. Almost. Rule 4 said never follow a whistle that matched my breathing. Rule 5 said if I found boot prints facing the station with no prints leaving it, I had to burn the incident report before sunrise. I stopped reading. Burn the report, I said. That's evidence. Mason looked at the cabinet marked Night Incidents. No, he said. Up here, it's an invitation. The room felt smaller after that. These aren't procedures, I said. These are campfire stories with paperwork. Mason did not get angry. Somehow, that made it worse. Every rule on that page was written after somebody survived long enough to tell us what not to do. Then I saw Rule 6. If someone you love calls from outside after dark, let them finish speaking. Then say, "You are not expected here." For a second, I thought of my mother. Then I thought of the man at Miller's Crossing, begging through the county line while water filled his truck. I hated that my mind put those voices so close together. I laughed because I did not know what else to do. Mason did not. That one, he said, is the easiest to mock. The station radio clicked behind him. Neither of us had touched it. Static breathed once through the room. Not loud, not clear, just enough to feel like something had heard its name mentioned. Then it stopped. Mason pushed the rule sheet into my hand. And the hardest, he said, to obey. Mason left before sunset. He showed me the stove, the generator switch, the first aid cabinet, and the logbooks. He checked the locks twice, then walked me through the radio channels, like that was the normal part of the job, and everything else could be folded into routine if I listened carefully enough. At the door, he paused with one hand on the frame. "Read before you react," he said. Then he was gone, his truck grinding down the gravel road until the forest swallowed the sound. He had trained me for the night shift, but he did not stay long enough to watch night arrive. For a while, Hollow Ridge behaved like any lonely station should. I logged the weather. I marked 2 campsites occupied. I answered a call from a day ranger near Deep Creek, asking if the north gate had been chained. My handwriting looked steadier than my hands felt. Outside, the last light drained out of the trees. The bells stayed still. I kept the laminated rule sheet beside the radio desk. I told myself it was there because Mason had asked me to keep it there, not because I believed it. Belief felt too close to panic, and I had spent months trying not to panic over voices coming through speakers. At 9:12, rain began tapping the roof. At 9:14, the station phone gave one short ring and stopped. At 9:16, the office seemed to get quieter, like the building itself knew what time meant here. Then the clock clicked over. 9:17. A woman's voice came through Channel 4, thin with static, but clear enough to understand. Hollow Ridge Station, This is Emily Parker on Trail 11. I need assistance. My friend fell near the creek crossing. Please respond. My pencil stopped halfway across the log. Trail 11. I looked at the wall map. The blacked-out line sat under layers of marker like a bruise. Trail 11 had been closed for 12 years. The creek crossing had washed out before I ever worked dispatch. The woman called again. "Hollow Ridge, please. He's bleeding badly." My fingers found the microphone the way your hand finds a light switch in a room you know too well. Then I saw the first rule. Log it. Do not answer. This time, the sheet told me silence was the procedure, so I wrote the call in the logbook. The woman kept begging. For almost a full minute, I thought that was the test. Then the begging stopped. The rain in the speaker kept falling, and in a voice calmer than mine, she said, "Are you writing this down?" The pencil rolled once, then stopped against my wrist. The pencil rolled once, then stopped against my wrist. I did not move. The woman on the radio had stopped begging, but the rain behind her continued, steady and close, as if the storm had crawled inside the speaker. I stared at the microphone. My thumb was nowhere near the transmit button. I had not made a sound. Still, she had known I was writing. "Hollow Ridge," she said softly. "Are you there?" The professional part of me wanted an explanation. Maybe she had heard the scrape of pencil through an open channel. Maybe some relay had stuck. Maybe Mason had set up a training test so I would learn the rules without getting myself killed. Then she said, "Caleb?" My stomach dropped so hard I felt it in my knees. I looked toward the dark windows. Beyond the glass there was only porch light, rain, and the black edge of the trees. No face, no flashlight, no injured hiker stumbling out of the woods. Just the voice. "Caleb Rusk," she said. "Please don't hang up." The room changed around those words. The radio desk, the maps, the clean clipboards, even the little station clock seemed to pull backward. And for 1 second, I was not at Hollow Ridge anymore. I was back in County Dispatch, wearing a headset, while floodwater filled a stranger's truck. "Don't hang up," she whispered. "Please don't let the water take me while you're listening." My hand closed around the microphone so hard the plastic creaked. I hated myself for it. The edge of the laminated rule sheet touched my wrist. Log it. Do not answer. Outside, one bell rang. Only once. The sound was small and high, swallowed almost immediately by rain. But it cut through me worse than a scream. I turned toward the window. Nothing moved there. The tree line stood black and still. For the first time, I understood the bells were not there to scare things away. They were there to tell us when something had noticed. When I looked back, the radio light had gone from green to red. Transmit. The microphone was still in my hand, but my thumb was flat against the side, nowhere near the button. Another voice came through under the woman's, lower and familiar. Mason. It had his voice, but not his rhythm. "Good," it whispered. The word was not praise. It was a measurement, like something had tried Mason's voice on and wanted to know if it fit. Then every light in the station flickered at once. Outside, the bell swung harder and harder in the rain. It never made another sound. Morning did not make Hollow Ridge feel safe. It only made the fear harder to justify. I spent the last 2 hours before sunrise sitting with the microphone on the desk, waiting for it to speak again. It never did. Around 5, the rain stopped. By 6, the mountains looked washed clean under pale sunlight. Birds moved in the trees. Water dripped from the roof. The bell outside hung still, as if it had not spent a night swinging itself silent. I had not slept. I waited until the first official check-in before calling Mason. My voice sounded normal when I reported weather, gate status, no response given. I did not mention the woman on Trail 11 using my name. I did not mention Miller's Crossing. I wanted to hear what Mason asked first, because people reveal more in the questions they choose than in the answers they give. He asked, "Did you answer?" Not, "Did anything happen?" Not, "Are you all right?" Just that. "No," I said. The line stayed quiet long enough for me to hear his breathing. "Good," he said. It was the same word the radio had used, but Mason said it with tired relief, and that made it worse. After he hung up, the station felt too orderly. Clipboards straight, pens capped, logs stacked by date, the kind of neatness people create to prove nothing is wrong. I started with the duty logs. Most were boring. Weather, closures, supply requests, bear sightings. Then I found a month where every page had the same square of yellow tape pressed over the night ranger's name. I held one sheet up to the window until sunlight passed through. Under the tape, faint but readable, was a name. Aaron Vale. The name meant nothing to me. That bothered me. Someone had worked hard to make sure it stayed that way. His last clean entry was dated 2 years earlier. Caller reported distress on closed trail. Familiar voice contact suspected. No reply given. Below it, another hand had written, "Do not archive with public incidents." I called Mason again. "Who was Aaron Vale?" For a moment, I thought he would hang up. "He was the ranger before you." "Quit?" "No," Mason said. Aaron walked out during daylight, with his radio still on his belt. "What happened?" "We found the radio," Mason said. "We never found him." Mason would not tell me anything else. That was the problem with old rangers. They treated silence like protection. After he hung up, I stood beside the radio desk with the receiver still in my hand, listening to the line buzz. Daylight filled it, but it did not reach the corners the way it should have. The cabinet marked "Night Incidents" sat near the door, locked, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. I told myself not to open it. Then I looked at Aaron Vale's name under the tape again. The padlock was cheap. The key was not hidden well. It hung behind the fire extinguisher on a nail painted the same color as the wall. That bothered me more than if Mason had kept it on him. A secret left that easy to find is not a secret. It is permission, with blame attached. Inside the cabinet were folders, cassette tapes, old photographs, and sealed envelopes labeled by date instead of incident number. Aaron's folder was at the back. His final log was handwritten. That alone felt wrong. Every other report had been typed or filled out on standard forms. This one looked rushed, the letters leaning hard to the right, as if he had written while standing, or while listening to something he did not want to hear. The first page said the calls were not random. Stranger voices came first: lost hikers, injured campers, children crying near trailheads. Then came familiar voices: coworkers, old friends, family members. Aaron had written one sentence twice. It learns what makes you answer. Near the bottom, Aaron described the final stage. Once it had a voice right, it started using names the station had never logged. Names from home. Names from grief. Names that should not have been able to reach Hollow Ridge. The last paragraph was nearly unreadable. Rule 6 was added for Mason after the voice came from the trees, wearing someone he had already buried. But on Aaron's last night, it kept saying Caleb. I read my own name 3 times before it became real. Aaron had written that 2 years before I arrived. 2 years before Mason offered me the job. Outside, one bell gave the smallest twitch in the sunlight. Not a ring, not even a sound. Just enough movement to prove the station was not done listening. I spent the rest of the day pretending Aaron's final log had not used my name. That was easier while the sun stayed up. I checked batteries. I tested the generator. I copied the 6 rules into the front of the duty log because routine gave my hands something to do. Every few minutes, though, my eyes drifted to the window and the crooked line of bells outside. They did not move again. By late afternoon, the sky had cleared until it looked almost fake. The weather radio called for dry conditions, light wind out of the northwest, and visibility improving after sunset. I wrote that down because writing normal things made them feel true. At 6:40, the wind shifted downhill. I remember the time because I had just stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee that tasted like metal from the station pot. The air moved past me toward the hollow, carrying the smell of wet leaves and cold stone. It was the kind of mountain wind that should have pushed mist lower, down into the creek beds. Instead, fog began climbing up from between the trees. At first it looked ordinary, a pale strip caught in the rhododendron. Then it thickened and rolled uphill against the wind, slow and deliberate, filling the low places first, then reaching for the gravel lot like water rising in silence. Rule 2 came back to me before I reached for the sheet. If fog rises uphill against the wind, lock the lower equipment shed and count the trail bells before midnight. I did not laugh this time. I also did not wait to feel brave. The lower shed sat 50 yards below the station, half hidden behind hemlocks. The path down was slick with old needles, and every step away from the porch made the building feel farther than it should have. Fog brushed my boots. It smelled colder than fog should smell, like a cellar door opened after years underground. The shed lock was still hanging in place. I closed my hand around it and felt the shackle tremble. Not from my hand, from the inside. Something inside the shed shifted once, slow and careful, like it had also decided not to look out. I snapped the lock shut anyway, turned the key twice, and backed uphill without looking through the gap beneath the door. Then I counted the bells, 1 near the porch, 4 by the lot, 9 along the closest tree line, more down by the shed path. I counted twice, then a third time because my first instinct was to blame fear. 28. Mason had said there were 29. Where the missing bell had hung, the cord was wet and cleanly cut. On the post below it were fingerprints, not smeared, not dragged, placed. Every one of them pointed upward toward the station. I should have gone back inside and locked the door. Instead, I kept thinking about the shed lock trembling from the inside. The fog had reached the gravel lot by then, Not thick enough to hide the station, but thick enough to soften its edges. The porch light glowed in a pale circle. Beyond it, the bells hung black and crooked from the trees, one space empty where the missing bell should have been. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to make the fingerprints mean something ordinary. A person had cut the cord. A person had touched the post. A person could have hidden near the shed and moved before I got there. That explanation lasted until I looked back downhill. The shed door was open. Not wide, just enough for the fog to breathe through the crack. The lock I had snapped shut 10 minutes earlier hung from the latch, closed around nothing. The hasp itself had been pulled through from the inside, bent outward in a clean curl of metal. No splinters, no pry marks, no boot prints in the wet needles except mine. I almost called Mason right then. My thumb found his number before I remembered the phone line breathing the night before. Instead, I took the heavy flashlight from the porch hook and walked back down. If the shed was open, then either I had failed the rule or something had changed the terms of it. Rule 2 had not said, check the shed. It had said, lock it, and I had. Inside, the shed smelled like oil, damp wood, and old rope. Shelves lined the walls, axes, fuel cans, trail signs, spare lanterns. Everything was in place at first glance. Then my light found the empty peg near the back. A ranger jacket was missing. Not just any jacket. Mason's. His name was still printed on the inventory tag beneath the peg. Rusk, Mason. Winter issue. Returned damaged. The jacket had not been stolen like clothing. It had been selected like a costume. I remembered the radio using his voice and getting the rhythm wrong. Something scraped above me. I lifted the beam to the rafters. The missing bell hung there from wet cord, tied neatly over my head. Its mouth faced downward, packed full of mud so it could never ring. Then the station radio crackled from uphill, loud enough to reach the shed. "Caleb?" Mason's voice called through the open door. This time, it sounded almost right. The rhythm was closer. The radio was uphill. The counting was not. Somewhere in the fog behind me, a second voice began softly counting bells, one by one. It started with the missing one. The counting reached 28 before I ran. I did not run when the radio used Mason's voice. I did not run when the second voice began counting from the fog. Some stubborn part of me still wanted to understand the rules before I obeyed them. But when that soft voice reached 28, paused, and whispered 29 from somewhere close behind my shoulder, my body decided for me. I hit the station steps hard enough to bruise my shin. The porch boards were slick with fog, and the key slipped twice before I got the door open. I slammed it behind me, through both locks, and stood there with my back against the wood, while the office swallowed the sound of my breathing. Outside, the counting stopped. That was worse. For the next hour, I checked every window, every latch, every corner of the little station. The radio stayed quiet. The bells did not ring. The fog pressed against the glass until the porch light became a dull, yellow blur. I kept seeing Mason's empty jacket peg in my head. Selected like a costume. By midnight, routine had almost done what routine always promised. It had made fear feel embarrassing. Then someone knocked. 3 times. Not loud, not frantic, polite almost, like a person who did not want to wake the whole mountain. I froze beside the radio desk. The knock came again. 3 measured taps. A woman's voice followed it, thin from cold, but steady. Hello? Ranger Station? My name is Emily Parker. I'm registered at Laurel Creek Campsite 3. My group got separated in the fog. Emily Parker. I had written that name in the log less than 3 hours earlier. My hand went to the rule sheet before I meant to. If a hiker knocks 3 times and gives their full name, ask for their permit number before opening the door. I moved close enough to see the shape through the frosted window. A young woman stood on the porch in a soaked blue rain jacket, hair plastered to her cheeks, one hand pressed to her ribs like she had been running. She looked real. That was the cruel part. Even the mud on her boots looked right. Please, she said, my friend is hurt. My fingers found the deadbolt. Then I remembered Trail 11, the voice begging through the radio, the way my guilt had reached for the microphone before my mind could stop it. If she died on that porch because I followed a laminated sheet, I would have another voice to carry. I forced my hand down. What's your permit number? I asked. Silence settled on the porch. The woman smiled without moving her eyes. Not like I had caught her. Like I had finally said the line she had been waiting for. The smile lasted too long. Then she gave me a number. Permit 4729, she said, watching me through the frosted glass. For 1 weak second, relief moved through me, so fast it felt like shame. A permit number meant procedure had worked. It meant she was a person, cold and injured and angry that a ranger had made her prove she existed before opening the door. Then I looked at the clipboard by the radio desk. Laurel Creek permits were 6 digits, not 4. My hand tightened around the deadbolt until the brass bit into my palm. The rule had done what my instincts almost failed to do. It had kept pity from opening the door. That's not valid, I said. The woman's smile faded in pieces. Her mouth relaxed first. Her cheeks stayed lifted. Her eyes stayed bright and still. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Caleb, she said, and it was no longer Emily Parker. It was a man's voice now, hoarse, tired, close to crying. I tried the permit number, too, he said. Mason told me it would be enough. I stepped back from the door. The voice on the porch lowered into a rough whisper I'd only seen in handwriting until that moment. Aaron Vale. Do not let Mason make the same mistake twice, the voice said. He sends men here and calls it protection. The office seemed to tilt around me. The locked cabinet, the taped names, Mason leaving before sunset. My own name in a missing ranger's last entry. What mistake? I asked, hating how quickly I sounded like someone taking the bait. The thing outside breathed against the door. For a moment, it sounded pleased. Ask him why Rule 6 was written, Aaron's voice whispered. Ask him whose voice came from the trees first. Then the voice changed again. Not into Emily, not into Aaron, into something softer, older, and impossible. Caleb boy, it said. Only my father had ever called me that. The name hit me with the smell of wet flannel and motor oil before I could stop it. My father had been dead for years, but grief does not check dates before it answers. Some part of me moved toward the door, like a child moving toward a porch light. The rule sheet lay open behind me. I did not say it on purpose. I barely said it at all. You're not expected here. The porch went silent. The silence felt startled. Then the woman outside began to laugh in Aaron's voice. I did not sleep after the woman left the porch. The laugh ended before dawn, but its shape stayed in the walls. I sat at the radio desk with both locks thrown and the rule sheet open in front of me, reading the same 6 lines until they stopped looking like words and started looking like a list of things people had learned too late. When gray light touched the windows, I called Mason. He answered on the second ring. Before he could speak, I said, "Who did Rule 6 come from?" Silence. That told me more than denial would have. "Mason," I said, "I heard Aaron Vale last night. I heard my father. Something stood on that porch, wearing a woman's face, and asked me to ask you." His breathing changed. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. "Caleb," he said, "listen to me carefully. Do not repeat what it said." Why? Because repeating is how people help it practice. I looked toward the door. The porch was empty, washed clean by fog, but I could still see where her boots had stood. "You knew this was happening," I said. "I knew enough to be afraid of it." "That's not an answer." "No," Mason said. "It's the only honest beginning I've got." Then he told me Hollow Ridge had been wrong since the winter of 1986, when a rescue party went missing near an abandoned mine tunnel below Trail 11. Sixan went in after a lost boy. One man came back 3 days later with no coat, no radio, and frostbite on his tongue. "On his tongue?" I asked. "The doctors blamed exposure," Mason said. "The ranger who found him said it looked like he had spent 3 days answering something in the cold." I did not know what to say to that. "He didn't speak at first," Mason continued. "When he finally did, every sentence started with somebody else's name." The first incidents were written off as exposure, grief, bad weather, people hearing what fear wanted them to hear. Then rangers began receiving calls from closed trails. Hikers reported family voices in fog. One dispatcher heard his own voice request help from a place he had never visited. "So you made rules," I said. "We found patterns," Mason answered. "Rules are what you call patterns after enough people die." He sounded older through the phone. None of them were written before someone ignored the warning and survived by accident. I thought of the wrong permit number, the silent bell, my father's nickname on another mouth. "You keep talking about hikers and rangers," I said. "It used my father's voice." The line crackled. "Trail 11 was closed because we sealed the entrance," Mason said. Mason? But sealing a door does not matter much when something has already learned to knock. "Mason," I said, "stop hiding behind the mine." For a while, all I heard was the soft electrical buzz of the line. He was still there. I could tell by the way he did not breathe. Old Ranger treated silence like protection. But by then I had learned that silence could be another kind of door. "It knew Dad," I said, "not just his name, his voice, his nickname for me." Mason exhaled slowly. "Your father was my younger brother," he said, as if I needed reminding. I knew his voice before he knew how to use it. Something in me tightened. "Then tell me why it has it." He did not answer right away. Outside, the morning fog had thinned into pale strips between the trees. In daylight, the porch looked almost normal again, except for the muddy outline where the woman had stood, and the faint smear her hand had left on the glass. "When your father died," Mason said, "I was stationed at Hollow Ridge." I closed my eyes. My father had died in a hunting accident when I was 19. That was the version our family told at funerals, birthdays, and awkward holiday dinners. Slippery ridge, bad weather, bad luck, clean grief wrapped in ordinary words. He had been the kind of man who made ordinary rooms feel warmer by entering them, which made losing him feel like a weather change no one else could measure. Mason's voice made the old version feel suddenly thin. "He didn't die up here," Mason said quickly, like he could hear the thought forming in me. "Not at Hollow Ridge, not because of this place, but grief carries farther than people think." "What does that mean?" "It means 3 nights after we buried him, I heard him outside this station." The room went still around me. "He was calling from the tree line," Mason said. Same laugh, same cough, same way he used to say my name when he wanted me to stop acting older than him. I looked at the rule sheet. If someone you love calls from outside after dark, let them finish speaking. "I almost opened the door," Mason said. His voice broke on, almost, and that scared me more than if he had cried. "What stopped you?" "The bells," he said. "All of them rang at once." I imagined Mason younger, standing where I stood, hearing his dead brother ask to come inside while every warning around him screamed in metal. "So Rule 6 was for you," I said, "at first." The words settled badly. "At first?" "Aaron heard it years later," Mason said. "Only it wasn't using your father's voice then. It was asking for you." My throat went dry. "I was a kid." "I know. You still brought me here." "I thought distance was making it stronger," Mason said. "Calls from closed trails, reports with your name in them, Aaron's last entry. I thought if you learned the rules before it reached you somewhere unprotected, you might survive hearing it." "That's protection?" "Anywhere else," Mason said, "someone would tell you to answer. A dispatcher would. A deputy would. A neighbor would. You would. Hollow Ridge was the only place I knew where the first rule was silence." "So you used the station to train me?" "No," Mason said quietly. "That's guilt, pretending it has a plan." The worst part was that I believed him. The worst part was that belief did not make me forgive him. I wanted to hate him for it. Part of me did. Another part of me wondered whether that was exactly what he had counted on. But beneath all that anger was something colder. Mason had not brought me to Hollow Ridge because he believed it was safe. He brought me because he believed nowhere else was. After that call, staying inside felt impossible. Leaving felt worse. I spent most of the afternoon moving through the station like a man trapped inside his own thoughts. I checked locks I had already checked. I copied radio codes I already knew. I wiped down the desk, even though there was nothing on it but dust and my own fingerprints. Mason had not asked me to forgive him. That made it harder. If he had defended himself, I could have stayed angry in a clean way. Instead, he had given me something worse than an excuse. He had given me a reason that sounded almost believable. Anywhere else, someone would tell you to answer. By 4:30, the station felt too small to hold that sentence. The air inside smelled like old coffee, damp paper, and the faint metallic stink from the stove. Outside, the fog had thinned, leaving the mountain bright and wet under weak afternoon sun. So I did the only thing that still sounded like a ranger's job. I checked the outer trail markers. I told myself it was necessary. The fog had moved strangely. One bell was missing. The lower shed had been breached. If I stayed behind the locked door until dark, fear would start making decisions for me. And I had already seen what happened when fear answered first. I took the heavy flashlight, a radio, and the laminated rule sheet folded in my back pocket. The trail behind Hollow Ridge dropped into a tunnel of rhododendron and laurel. Wet leaves brushed my sleeves. Water ticked from branches. Somewhere downhill, a creek moved over stone with a soft, ordinary sound that made the silence around it feel staged. At first, nothing happened. That was how the mountain worked. It let normal last just long enough to make you embarrassed for expecting anything else. I found the first blue search marker nailed to a poplar, then the second, then the third, half swallowed by moss. That was when I heard the whistle. One note. Thin, almost human. I stopped walking. The sound came from somewhere inside the rhododendron tunnel to my right. Not far, maybe 20 yards. It rose, dipped, then paused. I realized I had stopped breathing. I held the breath there, locked in my chest. The whistle kept going for 2 more seconds anyway. Then it came again. This time, it matched the rhythm I had just made in my chest. Short, uneven, afraid. Rule 4 moved through my mind before I reached for the sheet. Never follow a whistle that matches your breathing. The blue markers continued downhill in the same direction Aaron Vale had taken on his last patrol. The whistle sounded again from the trees. Then, slowly, it began moving away from me along Aaron's route. It was doing exactly what the rule warned me not to let it do. It was giving me a reason. I did not follow the whistle. That distinction mattered to me then. Maybe it still does. I stepped off the marked trail, pushed through the laurel uphill, and kept the sound to my left instead of in front of me. If the rule cared about intention, I was obeying it. If it cared about results, I was already in trouble. The woods thickened fast. Rhododendron branches hooked my sleeves and dragged cold water across my wrists. The station radio at my belt hissed twice, but no voice came through. Somewhere below me, the whistle moved slowly along the trail, pausing whenever I paused, continuing whenever I started breathing too hard. It was not leading me. I told myself that. I found marker 7, half buried in moss. Blue paint faded to the color of old bruises. Aaron's final patrol had mentioned markers 7 through 11. He had written them like a sequence he regretted beginning. At marker 8, the whistle stopped. The silence after it felt staged. I crouched near a fallen poplar to catch my breath, and saw the roots had lifted a pocket of earth when the tree came down. Something blue showed beneath them. Not paint, plastic. I dug with my fingers until mud packed under my nails. It was a search marker tag, the kind rangers used during organized sweeps. Aaron Vale's initials were scratched into the back. Tied to it, with fishing line, was a folded strip of paper, soft with damp, but still readable. It was not a full report, just a torn page. The first lines were smeared. The middle was clear. Boot prints found facing station. No exit tracks. Report drafted at 04:10. Subject response intensified after written documentation. Recommend destruction before sunrise. I read the sentence twice. Subject response intensified after written documentation. The paper shook in my hand. All my life, reports had meant control. You wrote something down so it could be verified, filed, understood. Here, writing did not bury an event. It fed it. A twig snapped below me. The whistle returned, quieter now. It matched the breath I had not taken yet. I folded the torn page and put it in my pocket before I could talk myself out of keeping it. The smart thing would have been to burn it in the mud. But I had spent too many years believing evidence only mattered if someone preserved it. That choice felt small then. Later, I understood it was another kind of answer. Then I saw a second line written along the margin in Aaron's cramped hand. The pencil had torn through the paper in places, angled as if he had added it while running through those same trees alone. If you describe it too well, it describes you back. I should have burned the torn page before I crossed the porch. Instead, I carried it back to the station, like proof, because old habits are hard to kill, and dispatcher habits are harder. Evidence belonged in files. Incidents belonged in reports. If something happened, you wrote it down so the next person would not walk blind into the same mistake. That belief had saved people before. At Hollow Ridge, I was beginning to understand. It could also mark them. By the time I reached the station, the sun was slipping behind the ridge, and the porch boards were damp with evening cold. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stopped. There were boot prints on the floor, mud dark, fresh, facing inward. They started at the threshold and crossed the office towards the radio desk. No prints led out. No smears showed someone turning around. Just one careful line of tracks, all pointed deeper into the station, as if whoever made them had walked inside and disappeared between one step and the next. I checked the locks. Both were still thrown. The boots were old Ranger issue, wide heel, deep tread. The same pattern I had seen in the supply closet under Mason's name. First the jacket, now the boots. It was not stealing from Mason. It was assembling him. For a while, I just stood there with Aaron's torn page in my pocket and watched water gather in the print closest to my chair. Rule 5 came back without mercy. If you find boot prints facing the station, but no prints leaving it, burn the incident report before sunrise. I had not written one yet. That should have comforted me. It did not, because my hand had already moved toward the blank report form on the desk. I told myself I was only documenting the tracks before destroying the page. I told myself a few details would help me think clearly. Time found, location, weather, direction of travel, possible connection to missing bell and shed breach, normal words. Safe words. The kind of words I had trusted more than my own instincts. Then the ink changed. I had written, boot prints observed inside station at approximately. The pen kept moving after my hand stopped. My fingers were not writing anymore. They were being used. At approximately 1847 hours, the line continued, though my hand had locked around the barrel. Observer returned with recovered documentation. Subject recognized observer. Subject is learning observer's full name. The room seemed to lean closer. Another line appeared beneath it. Observer residence, apartment 3B, 118 Keller Street. My chair scraped backward so hard it hit the wall. That was my address. Not Hollow Ridge. Not the station file. Home. The radio clicked once behind me. Then, from somewhere inside the office, close enough to touch, a voice whispered my name like it was reading it from the page. I did not turn toward the voice. I looked at the page, because by then I understood the page was the mouth. The pen lay on the desk where I had dropped it, but the ink kept spreading. Not writing now, growing. Thin black lines crawled out from the last sentence, branching through the report form like roots through damp soil. Subject is learning observer's full name. A new line began beneath it. Subject is learning what observer misses. My father's voice whispered from the corner behind the cot, "Caleb, boy." My hand went cold. Then the same voice shifted into the man from Miller's Crossing, wet and breathless. "Don't hang up." I grabbed the report with both hands. The paper felt warm, not sun-warm, body-warm, like something had been holding it from the other side. Rule 5 said, burn the incident report before sunrise. Sunrise was hours away. Learning me would not take that long. I crossed to the stove. I heard the soft, wet taps before I realized the prints had moved. They no longer ended at the radio desk. They circled the office now, slow and careful, all facing inward toward me. I opened the stove door with shaking fingers. The voice behind me became Mason's. "Don't burn it," he said. "We need proof." That almost worked. More than the voices had. More than my father's nickname had. Because proof was the oldest religion I knew. Then I remembered Aaron's warning. If you describe it too well, it describes you back. I shoved the report into the stove and struck a match. For 1 second, the flame leaned away from the paper, like the match knew better than I did. Then it caught. The sound that came from the radio was not static. It was too crowded for that. Aaron, Mason, Emily Parker, my father, the flood victim, my own voice, all of them layered together, correcting each other, testing each other, trying to decide which one sounded most like someone I would trust. I held the stove door shut. The paper curled black. The address vanished first, then my name, then the word observer. By the time the last corner collapsed into ash, the boot prints were gone. I stood there, breathing smoke and pine cleaner and fear. Then I heard a soft, wet creak behind me. One muddy print remained inside the station, fresh and dark. Not by the door, not by the radio, facing my bedroom. I did not sleep in that room. I sat in the office until dark with the bedroom door in sight, waiting for the print to dry, move, or vanish. It did none of those things. It stayed there, fresh and dark on the floorboards, facing the cot, like someone had stopped outside a sleeping man's room and decided to wait. By morning, I had placed a chair against the bedroom door. By afternoon, I had added the spare tool chest. By evening, I understood how useless that was. Hollow Ridge did not need doors to get inside. The station felt different after the report burned, not quieter, emptier in the wrong way, like something had taken one step back so it could look at the whole room. I kept the stove fed. I kept the lights on. I did not write anything unless I absolutely had to, and even then I used short words. Weather clear. No calls answered. Doors locked. Those felt safe enough. At sunset, the cabinet marked "Night Incidents" opened by itself. No click, no scrape. The padlock simply dropped from the handle and hit the floor with a dull metal sound that made my whole body flinch. I understood then that the station did not only hide records. Sometimes it offered them. The cabinet door swung open 2 inches, then 4, then all the way. Folders slid out first, spilling across the floor like something had exhaled them. Old reports, photographs, cassette tapes, search maps marked in red. One folder landed face up at my feet. The tab read, "Familiar voice contact confirmed cases." I knew better than to read it, but some part of me still believed a thing could be survived if it could be understood. Every report had a different name: ranger, hiker, volunteer, dispatcher, search team leader, missing child's mother. One report described a woman who heard her son outside the equipment shed, asking why she had stopped looking for him. But the final note was always almost the same. Subject heard loved one outside. Subject opened door. Subject left marked safety area. Subject not recovered. The pages went back decades. Hollow Ridge was not collecting ghosts. It was collecting reasons. Then I found Aaron's final complete report under the others. The one I had only seen in pieces. His handwriting was worse near the end, but one line was clear enough to make the room feel colder. It is not haunted by the dead. It rehearses grief until grief opens the door. The radio clicked behind me. No voice came through, just breathing. Slow, patient. It was not speaking yet. It was choosing. It waited until full dark. The breathing stayed on the radio while the last daylight drained from the windows. I did not touch the microphone. I did not write anything down. I sat with the rule sheet open beside my hand and watched the porch through the glass, because by then I understood that looking away did not make Hollow Ridge less interested. At first, there was only the sound of the stove and my own pulse. Then the breathing stopped. A knock came from the porch. 1 tap, not 3, not a hiker's knock. A familiar knock, the kind my father used when he came home late and did not want to wake my mother. 2 fingers against wood, soft enough to be considerate, heavy enough to say he was there. I remembered that knock from winter nights, the smell of cold air and sawdust coming in with him. My throat closed before the voice even came. "Caleb, boy." I did not move. The porch light showed nothing but fog and wet boards. No shape stood in the window. No face leaned toward the glass. Somehow, that made it worse. A body would have given me something to reject. A body could be wrong. The voice was not wrong. "I know you're tired," my father said. "I know you've been carrying that man from the flood." My hand tightened around the rule sheet. "You did what you could," he said. "You were a kid with a headset and a storm bigger than anybody wanted to admit. That death wasn't yours." I had imagined hearing those words from the supervisors, priests, therapists, strangers. I had never imagined they would hurt more in my father's voice. That was the cruelty of it. It did not ask me to open the door first. It gave me what I had wanted before it asked for anything. Forgiveness. Not loud, not holy, just my father's tired voice on the other side of a thin wooden door, saying the words I had been trying to earn from silence for months. "I'm proud of you," he said. My chair scraped backward. I stood without meaning to. The rule was clear. If someone you love calls from outside after dark, let them finish speaking. then say the words. But how do you know when a dead man is finished? How many times did I leave you waiting on the porch? My father asked softly. Let me wait this time. Open up, son. My mouth shaped the first word of the rule and stopped. My fingers touched the deadbolt, not turned, touched. Behind me, the radio clicked once, in Mason's voice, almost perfect. It whispered, "Let him in." That was when I understood. It was not using my father to make me afraid. It was using him to make the door feel like mercy. And my hand was still on the lock. My hand stayed on the deadbolt while my father waited outside. I could feel the metal through my fingertips, cold at first, then warming under my skin. The porch stayed empty in the window. The radio stayed quiet behind me after Mason's borrowed voice whispered, "Let him in." That was what nearly broke me. Not the begging, not the threat, not even my father saying he was proud. It was the permission. The part of me that had been trained to answer emergencies wanted to obey the voice on the radio. The part of me that had been a son wanted to obey the voice on the porch. Between them, the rule sheet on the desk looked small and foolish, a laminated page against every grief I had ever carried. Outside, my father sighed. The sound was perfect. I remembered him sitting at the kitchen table after long shifts, rubbing sawdust from his knuckles. Too tired to speak, but never too tired to listen. I remembered wishing, after he died, that I had asked him more questions. I remembered every ordinary silence I had wasted. "Caleb, boy," he said softly, "I'm done waiting." That was when I understood the trick hidden inside Rule 6. It did not say argue. It did not say explain. It did not say prove the voice was false. Let them finish speaking. Because the longer you answered with your heart, the more it learned what shape your heart had. I took my hand off the deadbolt. My fingers shook so badly I had to close them into a fist. I did not feel stronger after doing it. I felt emptied. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the porch boards creaked, one slow step closer to the door. I let the voice finish. The silence afterward was worse than the words. Then I said it. Not loud, not brave. "You are not expected here." The porch went still. The fog outside the window pulled backward from the glass as if something huge had inhaled. The deadbolt jerked under my hand, not opening, just hard enough to sting my palm. From the radio, Mason's voice flattened into static. For the first time all night, the voice outside sounded less like my father, and more like something disappointed by a failed tool. Then, the thing changed tactics. Smoke began leaking beneath the bedroom door. Thin at first, then darker, rolling along the floorboards toward my boots. The radio burst alive. This time, Mason sounded perfect. The rhythm was right. "Caleb," he shouted, "the station's burning. Get out now." For half a second, the old dispatcher in me believed him. Fire meant movement. Smoke meant evacuation. A familiar voice shouting orders meant you obeyed first and questioned later. My body turned toward the front door before my mind caught up. And that was how close it came. Then I stopped. Urgency had always been its favorite costume. I looked at the smoke again. It was rolling beneath the bedroom door, but the room behind that door had no stove, no wiring panel, no heater, nothing that should have been burning. The smoke did not rise either. It crawled along the floorboards in a flat, gray sheet, slow and deliberate, moving toward my boots like it wanted me to step away from the station's center. The radio screamed in Mason's voice, "Caleb, move!" This time, the rhythm was perfect. That made it easier to distrust. I checked the stove first. No flare, no leak, no heat beyond the fire I had made myself. I checked the wall outlet near the desk. Cold. I checked the ceiling. Clear. I did not open the bedroom door. The muddy print had been facing it for a reason, and I had learned enough not to give a door the benefit of the doubt. Outside, one bell rang. Then another. Not near the porch. Far away. The sound came from the lower ridge, faint and thin through the fog. Then another bell answered above it. Then another. Closer. The line of bells was ringing in reverse, from the farthest trees towards the station, as if something was counting its way back to me through metal. My hand found the rule sheet. Rule 2 had said, "Count the trail bells before midnight." It had not said what to do if the trail bells counted you. The smoke thickened around my ankles. Mason's voice kept shouting from the radio. My father's voice returned to the porch, softer now, asking why I would let myself burn after surviving so much. I closed my eyes. Radio, door, smoke, bells. Every rule wanted the same thing from me. Do not answer fast. Do not move because something begs. Do not follow what copies you. Do not preserve what studies you. Do not open for what knows your grief. So I stood in the center of the office, coughing, shaking, and refusing every voice. The ringing reached the porch. The walls shivered. Then every bell around Hollow Ridge rang once at the same time. Everything stopped. No radio, no smoke, no father. The bedroom door was cold. The floorboards were dry. Nothing had burned. Just my breathing. The smell of smoke in a room that had never caught fire, and the first thin gray light of sunrise pressing against the window. I waited another hour before I opened the door. Survival had not made me brave. It had made me careful. I checked the bedroom door first. Cold. I checked the stove. Dead ash. I checked the radio. Silent. Only after that did I unlock the front door and step onto the porch. Morning had washed Hollow Ridge clean again. That was one of the cruelest things about the place. After everything it did in the dark, it still knew how to look harmless in daylight. The trees glittered with rain. The gravel lot steamed faintly under the pale sun. The bells hung still, every one of them quiet, as if they had not screamed me through the last hour before dawn. Then I saw Mason's truck. It was parked below the station, near the lower bend, half-angled off the road, driver's door open. The engine was cold by the time I reached it. His coffee cup sat in the holder, untouched. His keys were still in the ignition. For one stupid second, I expected him to step out from behind a tree and tell me I had done well. He did not. Mason's old Ranger jacket lay folded on the driver's seat, the same winter-issue jacket that had gone missing from the shed. Across it rested the missing bell, clean now, empty of mud, tied with a fresh strip of white cloth. Under the bell was a note. "Caleb, if it comes wearing me, do not let it finish the sentence. It has heard the rule now. You survived because you listened. Now keep listening." Mason had signed only one word, Uncle. That broke something in me I had been holding together since the porch. I searched the road, the ditch, the tree line. The only tracks around the truck faced uphill toward Hollow Ridge. None faced back toward the road. The bell moved once in my hand, though no wind touched the road there. I understood then that Mason had not come to rescue me from the station. He had come to give it another voice to chase. He had not reached the porch. And something had left wearing enough of him to find the road. By noon, I had called it in. By evening, men with badges and radios were walking Hollow Ridge in careful lines, saying words like search grid, exposure, unknown direction of travel. None of them wrote the word voice. I did not ask them to. The station closed 2 weeks later. Officially, it was because of structural concerns, radio interference, and unresolved safety issues on Trail 11. Unofficially, everyone who packed the files avoided looking at the bells. I left with one duffel bag, Mason's note folded in my wallet, and the laminated rule sheet hidden under my jacket like something stolen from a church. I kept the bell too. I told myself it was evidence, but by then I knew better than to trust that word. For a while, I told myself distance worked. I moved 3 towns over. I took a warehouse job where nobody called me after dark. I stopped using the old dispatch scanner. I slept with a fan running, so silence could not stand too close to the bed. Months passed. I started answering my phone again. That was how normal returns, not all at once, but in small permissions you give yourself because you are tired of living like survival is still happening. Then, one rainy night, someone knocked on my apartment door. 3 times. Not hard, not urgent, polite. I was standing in the kitchen with a glass of water in my hand. The sound went through me so cleanly, I spilled half of it down my shirt. For a moment, I told myself it was a neighbor. Then Mason's voice spoke from the hallway. "Caleb," he said calmly, "you forgot to return the rule sheet." I did not move. The deadbolt was locked. The chain was set. Rain tapped against the window behind me, soft and steady. The same rhythm I had heard through the radio on my first night at Hollow Ridge. Mason waited outside my door. Then he added, almost gently, "I won't finish the sentence if you open up now." The real Mason had warned me about that. Which meant the thing outside had learned the warning too. I reached into my drawer and found the laminated sheet. Rule 6 looked darker than the rest, as if the ink had been rewritten, while I was not looking. Outside, Mason breathed once. Listening, practicing. And somewhere deep in my closet, where I had hidden it under old coats, the missing bell began to ring.